All right, so here we go again. Now, in the last section, we started learning a little bit more about JSX. We learned that it's technically JavaScript, it's not HTML that we're writing. And we also learned that browsers don't know how to understand the JSX code, so we use tools like Babel to take our JSX, and then that converts it into normal JavaScript. So in this section, I want to go through a nifty little exercise that's going to give us a better idea of how HTML and JSX are slightly different. So we're going to put together a tiny little snippet of HTML using CodePen. And we are going to write out normal HTML, and then we're going to pull it into our React project and convert it into JSX. So what this is going to do is give us a really clear idea of some of the differences between the two. Are you ready for this? Right, so first, I'm going to open up CodePen by opening a new browser tab and going to the codepen.io. All right. If you're there, once we're here, I'm going to find that Create section at the top left-hand side and create a new pen. So we're only going to be doing HTML here. So I'm going to minimize the other tabs, and we'll put together just a couple of different elements. So I'm going to put a div in here. So inside of this div, I'm going to first begin with a label, and I'll give it a title of, enter email. How's that? Now, after that, I'll put in an input, and then finally a button. All right, so for the button, I'll say submit. Okay, so just very simple, straightforward HTML, you might say. But now, I want to go through here and add on a couple of attributes. So on the label, I'm going to say that this is a label for input with an ID of name, and then I'll immediately add an ID of the name to the input. And then let's give a class name to the label. Now, we're not going to actually do any styling right now, but I just want to show you how the CSS class is changing when we use JSX. So then on the input, I'm going to say type text. And then finally, I'm going to put a little bit of a, custom styling on the button. So I'll say style is going to be background color of red. All right, so now that turned the button red. And let's give the text a color of white as well. All right, so that's it. Pretty simple HTML snippet. And I hope that everything that we put in here is pretty easy to understand. So now let's copy this HTML, and we're going to go back over to our friend, the code editor, and we're going to paste it into our app component, and then we'll see how this HTML displays inside of our React application. Okay? So back over here, I'm going to find the div that we currently have, and I'm going to delete it, and I still have the return keyword. However, don't forget that return keyword. And I'm going to paste in the HTML that we just wrote out and save it. And I'm going to see how this appears in the browser. All right, so you can see that we immediately get an error message here. Ha-ha! Okay, what happened? The question of the day is, why did we see an error message when we just took some HTML and tried to use it inside of our React component? So, what we're going to do is start to learn some of the differences between JSX and just regular old HTML while we are responding to the reason that this error message occurred. See, you're starting to see the method of my madness. Now, I got a quick little list right here. In general, all of the existing knowledge that you have around HTML is going to apply directly over to JSX. But there are some differences, okay? They might be subtle at first, but you're going to realize how big they really are. Now, the first difference that I want you to be aware of is how we add custom styling to an individual element, as we are attempting to on the button element right here. So that's the first thing that's different between JSX and HTML. Now, let's take a look at another diagram. And that's going to help you understand how we can take the HTML version and then convert it over to JSX. Okay, so in this example, we've got a div with an inline style of background color red. In order to apply that to JSX elements, we're going to change the syntax just a little bit. So we're still going to say style equals, but after that, we're going to place two curly braces in a row. The outer curly brace right there indicates that we want to reference a JavaScript variable inside of our JSX. And the second curly brace right there is meant to a JavaScript object. So in other words, when we do styling with JSX, rather than provide a simple string like so, we're going to instead provide a JavaScript object where all the keys of the object reference a different property that we want to style, and the values indicate the value for that particular styling. Yeah? Now, the other thing that you need to be aware of is that if we're trying to apply a style property name like background-color, we're going to remove that dash and then capitalize the next letter. Then we need to make sure that our values are wrapped with a single quote. Okay, so let's do it. First, remove the double quotes and replace it with curly braces. And then remove that dash and make sure that's a capital C. Alrighty then, all we need to do now is make sure that these values are wrapped in a string. So I can wrap it with a single quote like so. Then we just remove the semicolons and don't forget to add a comma right here. Now, you may have noticed that for these values right here of red and white, I used single quotes, whereas for all the JSX, I used double quotes instead. So this is a little bit of a community convention. First off, when we use JSX, we're supposed to use double quotes anytime that we want to indicate a string. So in all these locations here, like label, name, text, we're supposed to use double quotes, but then for any non-JSX property, by convention in the JavaScript community, we make use of single quotes. But there are tons of people that prefer to use double quotes everywhere instead. For you, you can do it either way. It's totally up to you. Fun little fact. So in general, the conversion here is pretty straightforward. Just remove the double quotes, replace them with curly braces, and then if you ever have the kind of compound property name, remove the dash, and make sure you do a capitalization. So then after you make a change, you can just save this file, and then flip back over to your React application, and you will see, that the error message goes away. All right, that's it. Next, we're going to talk about adding a CSS class to an element. So whenever we want to assign a class to JSX, we're going to use a slightly different syntax from HTML. So let's go back over to the inside of our index.js file, and our label has a class of label right here. Now, technically, we're not supposed to use the keyword class inside of a JSX element. Instead, we use class names like so. Okay. Now, of course, you may be wondering, why do we have to do that? Or not. I'm going to show you anyway. Because I want you to remember that when we were working with CodePen just a little while ago, we had created an ES 2015 class. And I'm going to show you a quick example of that right here. We had written something like class app extends react.component. So the keyword in there was class. That was a JavaScript keyword. Now, the reason that we have to use the class name instead of class in JSX is essentially just to avoid collisions with this keyword class. That's it. Now, you go to the head of the class. So in other words, we just don't want JavaScript to get all confused and think that we're trying to define a new JavaScript class with this, right? It's all for clarity, right? So that's all. It's going to be time to move on to the next section, and we're going to talk more about JSX.